Hi everyone, it's Ann at Super Stitch. This video is for anyone who's just starting to sew, or you're just curious about what notions you should have on hand, and these are things of your basic supplies that you should just have ready to go. It's going to make your sewing a lot easier. You'll be able to find links for a lot of these things that I'm using in the descriptions below. So just a few tips. One of the first things you're going to need is a really good quality pair of scissors. Now whether you're a garment sewer or a quilter or a crafter, everybody needs a good pair of scissors. You want something that's going to be able to cut anything from the most delicate fabric. You want to be able to cut cleanly through your delicate fabric without chewing it up. And then you also want to make sure that you have something that's strong enough to go through heavy fabric as well. My favorite are the 8-inch Gingers. These have a knife edge blade, and this is just my go-to scissor for just about anything. Then you're also going to need to have on hand, usually right next to you while you're sewing, you're going to need some little snips for snipping threads or clipping seams, things like that. I just like these tiny little snippers here, just something like this that you can just come in and just give little snips. If you're always losing your snips, you can't seem to find them, these on the lanyard are really handy too. And this has just a nice little snipper. And again, I can just come along and just snip with this as well. Of course, there's lots of other specialty scissors for embroidery and applique and all kinds of there's rag snips and everything, but these are your basics that you're going to want to start with. Of course, you're going to need thread. So if you're sewing, I really recommend that you get a good quality thread. Depending on what you're doing, you're going to want a good quality thread. So there's different threads out there for different purposes. You want to have just a nice, basic, good quality, all-purpose thread. This is a 50 weight polyester. This is metrazine. It's just a good quality, all-purpose thread that you want to have on hand. Quilters tend to prefer cotton sometimes, so again, you want a good quality. This is a 50 weight cotton thread. So it just depends on, sometimes it's just personal preference whether you want to use cotton or polyester. Then we have, if you're doing applique and some decorative stitching, embroidery especially, you want a finer thread, and this is a 60 weight bobbin thread. When you get into your decorative stitching and embroidery, you're going to want embroidery thread. And these are 40 weight threads. This is a Robeson Anton 40 weight thread, and this is our Floriani 40 weight thread. So you're going to want different threads depending on what you're doing to get your sewing the right look that you want. What's really important though is to make sure it's a good quality. So for example, this is my metrazine. It's just a good all-purpose thread. You can see how strong that is, as opposed to here's some of your less expensive thread, and you can see how easily that will break and shred. So sometimes when if your machine is breaking thread constantly, instead of blaming the machine, it might just be your thread. So you might want to just make sure that you're using a good quality thread. And again, the more you get into sewing, there's invisible thread and elastic thread and a top stitch thread. There's all kinds of specialty threads again, but again, these are your basics that you want to get started with. So if you're machine sewing, of course, you're going to need to make sure you're using good quality machine needles. We recommend that you change your needle after every 5th bobbin. So you don't want to just put a needle in and sew until it breaks. It's important to use the right size needle for the right type of fabric that you're using. A 90-14 is considered a general universal size. The way needles are rated, the higher the number, the heavier the needle. So a 75-11 is a finer needle than a 90-14. If you're doing decorative stitching, embroidery, we like our blue tip size 11 needle for our embroidery and our decorative stitching. We have our purple tip needles that has a different shaped eye, and this helps prevent skip stitches for quilting. Our red tip 90-14 is for your denser embroidery or for regular sewing. And then these are made by Organ. These are also Organ needles in a size 12 and a size 14 here. For quilters that are doing sewing with batiks, there's a microtex needle, and that has an extra sharp point. So the two brands that we carry are Snips and Oregon, but you just want to make sure you're using a good quality needle. You want to use the right size needle for what you're doing, and make sure that you do change it occasionally. So whether you're garment sewing or you're quilting, you're going to need either pins, or sometimes we also use these little clips if it's too difficult to pin or you don't want to use pins. So there's a couple different types of pins. Your quilting pins are a little bit longer. They have a nice round head on them. So it's a nice long needle. These flower tip needles or pins are also really nice for quilting and also for garment sewing. They're a nice flat so that they lay nice and flat when you're pinning. If you get into heirloom sewing, especially where you're doing, where you're going to be lace shaping, things like that, where you're actually pressing down on the needle, we have glass head pins. So what's nice with the glass head pin is you can actually press on that, and that's not going to melt onto your fabric like something like this would. So again, it's important that you have nice sharp pins, and then these clips are also really, really handy for putting on your holding your bindings and things like that. And they come in different sizes. Or creating a face mask. Yes, instead of using pins, these clips are great for holding your pleats in. Great for all kinds of things here. So we've got our clips in small and large sizes, and we've got our different pins. Whatever kind of sewing you're doing, whether you're doing garment sewing or you're doing quilting, your measuring is going to need to be accurate. So if you're doing regular garment sewing, you're probably going to use a measuring tape for measuring yourself and measuring your pattern. And any basic measuring tape should work. And some of them have millimeters and inches. You just need just a nice basic measuring tape. If you are doing quilting or rotary cutting, you're going to want to have a good quality ruler. We like the Quilter Select rulers. There's a large selection of these, and what's great with these rulers is that the fabric simply does not move, or the ruler will not slip on the fabric. So I can just hold the fabric here, hold the ruler, and then very easily cut. If you're cutting blocks or whatever, I could just hold it right here, and I can just literally turn the fabric, and the ruler won't slip. We've got an entire selection of these. Just absolutely love our Quilter Select rulers. So speaking of cutting, you're going to need, in addition to a good ruler, you're going to need a rotary cutter, and you're going to need a cutting mat. Rotary cutters come in different sizes. The most common is the 45 millimeter and the 60 millimeter. Quilter Select also has a great rotary cutter, and Alex Anderson does have a great video on using this rotary cutter. We will have a link in the description below. Another thing that you're going to have on hand, unfortunately, is a seam ripper. Your basic seam ripper, you can just pick your seams out, run it along and cut out a seam. There's different sizes, so you're just going to need to have a basic seam ripper on hand. We also have this really handy dandy seam remover, which is really nice on things like this where you've got a nice kind of a delicate open weave, and it's really kind of hard to even see where the stitch is to remove it. So my seam remover, I can just run it down and it's just going to take it right out. Another thing you're going to need to have on hand is maybe a variety of fabric marking pens or devices. And that can be anything from a water-soluble pen. This is a basic water-soluble pen here. It just comes out with water. This one has a little bit finer point, really, really nice, especially if you're marking through rulers and things like that. It's got a nice fine tip to it. These are water soluble. Then we have our friction pens, which are heat erasable. You can just mark on that, and then they'll just come out with heat. Sew line makes a really nice fine pencil. It's great for your ruler work and things like that when you need a nice fine line on your quilts. For your darker fabrics, we've got just regular tailor's chalk, and that just will iron off. Or we have our nice Choco liner that gives you a really nice fine chalk line. You're going to want to have yourself a couple different types of good fabric marking pens or devices. When you're sewing, it's also really important to have an iron nearby, because you're going to do as much pressing as you will sewing in order to get whether you're garment sewing or you're quilting. It's important that your seams are pressed nicely. This nice little iron that I've shown before is just so handy to have nearby. And it's great for just pressing your seams as you're sewing. It's a great thing to bring to class too. It's just a nice handy little iron here, and it does accept steam as well. This is our steam fast iron. But you do also want to have a good quality iron as well. So this is, most of the irons today are going to have an auto shut off. There's, again, there's different types of irons. Again, just want a good iron. You can see how much steam I'm going to have with that. So you want something that's going to give you a good pressure and good steam. We use this quilter's cut and press quite a bit too, because you can press on one side, you can also pin to this, and then you can flip it over and you've got a handy little cutting mat as well. Again, great for bringing to class, great to have right next to your sewing machine. Quilters also like to use these wool mats. And they come in different sizes. And these are great for pressing your quilt blocks. So these are just a few of my favorite things. We'd love for you to comment on what your favorite notion is, and also if you'd like to see a video on any other notion or technique, anything else, just put it in your comments. Thank you.